The shrill ring of my phone cut through the silence at 2:43 a.m. I knew before I even answered, calls at this hour never bring good news. My trembling fingers fumbled for the device on the nightstand. "Mrs. Harrison, this is Denver Medical Center. Your son Michael has been brought in with a massive stroke. You need to come right away." The world stopped spinning. At 67, I thought I had prepared myself for life's worst moments after losing my husband Richard 12 years earlier. But nothing could have prepared me for this. Michael, my brilliant, compassionate only child, couldn't be dying. Not at 42. Not when his young son needed him most. Hey everyone. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to know, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from around the world. I arrived at the hospital wearing my bathrobe under a coat, hair disheveled, hands shaking uncontrollably. A somber-faced doctor led me to a consultation room where words I never wanted to hear shattered my existence forever. Catastrophic stroke. No warning signs. Nothing we could do. Already gone. If this moment makes your heart ache, hit subscribe now. Don't be the one who looks away while others honor stories like this. And if you refuse, tell us in the comments why this loss doesn't move you. My Michael, gone. Hours melted together as paperwork was signed and impossible decisions were forced upon me. It was past noon when Victoria, Michael's wife of 12 years, finally swept into the hospital. Designer sunglasses masked her eyes, perfectly manicured nails clicked against her phone screen. "Sorry I'm late," she said without looking up. Traffic was horrible, and I had to arrange care for Marcus. I had already called Marcus's school and arranged for him to spend the day with his best friend's family. That Victoria hadn't thought to handle this basic parental responsibility was disappointingly typical. "Michael's gone," I said quietly, studying her reaction. Victoria's glossy lips formed a perfect circle of surprise. Her hand fluttered dramatically to her throat, a gesture that might have seemed genuine if I hadn't spent years watching her calculated performances. "But he was fine last night," she protested, her voice catching artificially. "We had dinner together. Then he went to his office to work. I went to bed early without even saying goodnight." For a brief moment, something resembling real regret flickered across her face before being replaced by what I could only describe as relief mixed with calculation. As the day progressed, I observed Victoria making hushed phone calls, stepping away whenever hospital staff approached with questions about funeral arrangements. When decisions needed to be made about Michael's body, she deferred to me with startling casualness. "You knew what he wanted better than I did," she said with a dismissive shrug. By evening, as we waited for the funeral home to collect Michael's body, Daniel Walsh arrived, Michael's closest friend since college and his personal attorney. His genuine grief was evident in his red-rimmed eyes and crushing embrace. "I can't believe he's really gone," Daniel whispered. "We had lunch just last Monday." I nodded, too overcome with grief to speak. Daniel turned to Victoria, offering condolences that were met with a practiced nod of somber acknowledgement. "We'll need to meet soon," Daniel said, his professional tone returning. "There are matters in Michael's will requiring immediate attention." Victoria straightened visibly at this, dabbing at suspiciously dry eyes behind her designer sunglasses. "Of course. Tomorrow would be best. I'd like to resolve things quickly for Marcus's sake." The mention of my grandson pierced through my fog of grief. Marcus, sweet, sensitive 9-year-old Marcus, who had lost his father and whose mother was already thinking about resolving things quickly. "Marcus should be told in person," I said firmly. "I'll come with you to pick him up." "That's unnecessary," Victoria replied swiftly. "I can handle my own son." The emphasis on "my" wasn't lost on me. It was a familiar pattern, Victoria asserting control over Marcus when it suited her narrative as devoted mother, while delegating actual parenting to Michael and increasingly to me. "He adores you, though," she added, her tone artificially softening. He'll need his grandmother more than ever now. The manipulation was transparent. After 32 years as a psychology professor, I recognized what she was doing, positioning herself while ensuring I remained available for childcare, yet establishing clear boundaries of authority. As we left the hospital, I caught sight of Victoria checking her reflection in a window, adjusting her hair before pulling out her phone for another call. In that unguarded moment, her face showed neither grief nor shock, only cool assessment, like someone calculating their next move in chess. I turned away, my heart breaking anew. Not only had I lost my beloved son, but my grandson was in the hands of a woman who seemed to view his father's death as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. What I didn't know then was that Michael had anticipated this exact scenario and had taken extraordinary measures to protect both Marcus and me from the woman he had finally recognized as a threat to us both. In the coming days, as I struggled through grief to arrange my son's funeral, I would begin uncovering the breadth of Michael's foresight and the depth of Victoria's deception. But that night, returning alone to my empty house, I could only clutch my son's childhood photo and wonder how I would find strength for the days ahead. For Marcus, I told myself. I must be strong for Marcus. Something about Victoria's behavior triggered every protective instinct I possessed. My grandson had lost his father. I was determined he wouldn't lose his grandmother too, not when I suspected he would need me more than ever. After 30 years studying human behavior, I've learned to recognize genuine grief. It manifests differently in each person, some collapse inward, others rage, some grow eerily calm, but there's an authenticity that can't be fabricated. As I sat in the front pew of the church, watching mourners approach Michael's casket, I witnessed a masterclass in emotional performance from my daughter-in-law. Victoria had dressed impeccably in a designer black dress that managed to be both appropriate and flattering. Her hair was styled in subdued waves, her makeup subtle yet flawless, tear-proof mascara evident as she occasionally dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She leaned against me at calculated intervals, murmuring things like, "He would have loved such a wonderful turnout," and "Michael always spoke so highly of everyone here." To observers, we appeared united in grief, the devastated widow and heartbroken mother supporting each other through unimaginable loss. Only I could feel how lightly she rested against my shoulder, ready to straighten whenever someone important approached. Only I noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, assessing each mourner's social and financial status. Only I caught the subtle changes in her voice when speaking to Michael's wealthier clients versus his childhood friends. But my attention focused primarily on Marcus, seated on my other side, his small body occasionally shaking with silent sobs. Unlike his mother, my grandson's grief was raw and authentic, his face blotchy from genuine tears. I kept my arm around him, offering tissues and quiet comfort as he stared at the casket containing his father. "Is Daddy really in there?" he whispered during a lull in the service. If this innocent question broke you, subscribe immediately. If it didn't move you, explain why below. "His body is," I explained gently. "But the special part that made him Daddy, his love, his thoughts, his spirit, that's still with you always." Marcus nodded, seeming to understand this distinction better than many adults. "I can still feel him sometimes, like he's watching." "I believe he is," I said, fighting back fresh tears. Victoria leaned across me. "Marcus, sit up straight. People are watching." I felt his small shoulders stiffen under my arm. This concern with appearances rather than her son's emotional state was precisely why Michael had been increasingly leaving Marcus in my care over the past year. After the service, the procession of mourners offering condolences seemed endless. Michael had been beloved by colleagues at his law firm, by clients he had helped, by neighbors and friends. Each person shared stories about his kindness, integrity, and gentle humor. "Your son helped me keep my house during my divorce," one woman told me, clasping my hands. "He reduced his fees when he learned I was struggling, then connected me with financial advisors who helped me get back on my feet. Michael was the only attorney who took my discrimination case when no one else would," an elderly gentleman said. "He cared about justice, not just billable hours. These testimonials were bittersweet comfort to my aching heart. My son had lived his values, had made a difference. I stored each story carefully, knowing Marcus would treasure them someday. Throughout the reception, I noticed Victoria having intense whispered conversations with several people, including a tall, expensively dressed man I didn't recognize. When I approached, they separated smoothly, Victoria introducing him as Robert Kane, one of Michael's real estate investment partners. "My condolences, Mrs. Harrison," he said, his handshake brief and impersonal. Michael was a remarkable man. Something in his tone rang false, and the way Victoria's hand briefly touched his arm suggested familiarity beyond business acquaintance. I filed this observation away, my professor's brain automatically cataloging behavioral details even through grief. By evening's end, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Marcus had fallen asleep on a funeral home couch, emotionally spent. As I arranged his suit jacket over him like a blanket, Daniel approached quietly. "Margaret, could we speak privately for a moment?" I followed him to a secluded corner away from lingering mourners. "Michael left explicit instructions about certain matters," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. "I can't go into details yet, but he asked me to tell you something immediately. Trust your instincts about Marcus." "Does that make sense?" I glanced toward my sleeping grandson, then at Victoria, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror while nodding absently at condolences. "Yes," I said slowly. "I believe it does." "Good. We'll need to meet officially tomorrow about the will. But Michael wanted you to know, arrangements have been made for both of you." Before I could ask more questions, Victoria approached, her social smile firmly in place. "Daniel, I hope we can resolve everything quickly," she said. "I'm thinking of taking Marcus away for a while after this. A healing trip. Probably best to handle estate matters promptly." "Of course," Daniel replied neutrally. "My office tomorrow at 2 p.m. As we prepared to leave, I gathered Marcus into my arms, his slight weight a precious burden. Victoria made no move to help, instead scrolling through her phone. 19 missed calls, she sighed. So many arrangements to make. I studied her composed face, noting the absence of grief's telltale signs, no swollen eyes, no exhaustion of spirit, none of the physical manifestations of heartbreak currently crushing me from within. "What arrangements?" I asked carefully, keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. "Life goes on, Margaret," she said without looking up from her screen. "Bills, accounts, notifications. Michael handled everything. Now it's all on me. Not us. Not, we'll figure it out together for Marcus." The solitary me spoke volumes. As I settled Marcus into my car, having agreed to keep him overnight to give Victoria space to process, I felt a strange sense of foreboding mixed with something else, something that felt almost like Michael's presence urging me to stay vigilant, to watch carefully, to protect what he could no longer protect himself. "We're going to be okay, Marcus," I whispered to my sleeping grandson. Somehow, we're going to be okay. I didn't yet know how prophetic or challenging that promise would prove to be. "Everything goes to me, doesn't it?" Victoria's perfect composure slipped for the first time as she sat in Daniel's office the day after the funeral. I watched her face cycle through emotions, first smug satisfaction, then confusion, finally thinly veiled outrage as Daniel continued reading the will's provisions. "Not exactly," Daniel corrected, his professional tone unchanged. "Mr. Harrison left you the mountain cabin property, his investment portfolio with Sterling Partners, and a life insurance policy of $525,000. I sat quietly, hands folded, as Daniel outlined the inheritance that left Victoria increasingly agitated. While substantial by most standards, nearly $1.1 million total, it clearly fell short of her expectations. The family home at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, both vehicles, and his personal account at Mountain Trust Bank are bequeathed to his mother, Margaret Harrison, Daniel continued, not meeting either of our eyes as he read directly from the document. "That's impossible," Victoria interrupted, her manicured nails digging into the leather armrests. "We purchased that house together. It's marital property." Daniel slid a document across the desk. "The house was purchased solely in Michael's name before your marriage. It was never converted to joint property. The deed confirms this." I kept my expression neutral despite my shock. Michael had never mentioned these arrangements. The family home, a beautiful craftsman with 4 bedrooms and a backyard where Marcus had his treehouse, was apparently mine, not Victoria's. So were Michael's BMW sedan and Range Rover, along with a bank account I hadn't known existed. "What about Marcus's college fund?" Victoria demanded, her voice rising. "Michael always said he was setting aside money for Marcus's education." Daniel nodded. "Mr. Harrison established a trust for Marcus's educational expenses. You are not the trustee of this account." "Then who is?" Victoria's question came out as nearly a hiss. Daniel glanced at me briefly. "Margaret has been named trustee of all funds related to Marcus's care and education." The room fell silent as Victoria processed this information. I could almost see calculations happening behind her eyes, totaling assets, weighing options, formulating responses. "This makes no sense," she finally said, her voice deliberately modulated to convey wounded confusion rather than the anger simmering beneath. "Michael and I discussed our estate plans. This is nothing like what we agreed upon." "The will was updated 4 months ago," Daniel replied simply. "Michael came to me specifically to make these changes. Everything is legally executed and witnessed." 4 months ago. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "He never mentioned any changes to me." "That was his prerogative," Daniel replied. I remained silent, absorbing the implications. 4 months ago, Michael had secretly revised his will to ensure I would have the family home and financial resources while limiting Victoria's access to certain assets. The timing corresponded with a period when Michael had seemed particularly troubled, often bringing Marcus to stay with me for father-son weekends that I suspected were actually meant to give Michael space to deal with marital issues. "There must be some mistake," Victoria said, turning to me with a practiced look of appeal. "Margaret, you know Michael would have wanted his family to remain in their home. You have your own house. Surely you don't intend to take ours away from Marcus." The subtle manipulation was masterful, framing any enforcement of Michael's wishes as me taking something from my grandson rather than from her. "I'm as surprised as you are, Victoria," I said truthfully. "I need time to process all of this." Daniel continued with additional details, items about personal effects, specific bequests to charities, funeral expenses that had been prearranged. Throughout it all, I noticed Victoria texting under the table, her face a mask of appropriate grief occasionally disrupted by flashes of calculation. When the meeting concluded, Daniel asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once Victoria had left with a tight-lipped promise to talk soon directed at me, he closed his office door. "There's more," he said quietly. "Michael left this for you with instructions to give it to you privately after the initial reading." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Michael's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. "Should I?" I gestured to the envelope. "Take it home," Daniel advised. "Read it when you're alone and ready." "And Margaret," he added, his professional demeanor softening, "Michael knew exactly what he was doing. Trust that." I nodded, slipping the envelope into my purse as I rose to leave. In the lobby, I found Victoria engaged in an intense phone conversation, her back turned. I paused, out of sight but within earshot. "Completely blindsided me," she was saying, her voice low but furious. "The house, the cars, even access to Marcus's education fund. No, I don't think he suspected anything. Must have been his mother's influence. Of course I'm going to fight it, Robert. I've invested 12 years in this family. I deserve more than some mountain property and insurance money. I retreated silently, my mind racing with questions, but one thing becoming increasingly clear: Michael had anticipated something I was only beginning to understand. Back in my own home, with Marcus still at school, I finally opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page of letterhead from Michael's law office. Mom. If you're reading this, the unthinkable has happened. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but there's no one I trust more. My marriage has been failing for some time. What began as growing apart has evolved into something more concerning. I've discovered things about Victoria that make me fear for Marcus's future emotional well-being and for your security. I've arranged things to protect you both. The house, cars, and money aren't really for you. They're tools to ensure Marcus has one stable, loving parent figure when I'm gone. Victoria will fight this. She'll try to manipulate you. Don't let her know what you know or suspect. Watch and wait. Document everything regarding Marcus's care. Daniel has the rest of my instructions and evidence I've gathered. He'll help when the time is right. I love you, Mom. You taught me to see people clearly and to plan ahead. I'm counting on those same qualities now to protect my son. Michael. I pressed the letter to my chest, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. Even facing his own mortality, Michael had been thinking of protecting his son and me. Now I understood my mission clearly. For my son's sake, for Marcus's future, I would need to become something I'd never been before, a strategic opponent in what was clearly going to become a battle with Victoria. It was time to put my psychology background to its most important use. Grandma, when is Daddy coming back? Marcus's innocent question over breakfast 3 days after the funeral pierced my heart. At 9 years old, he was old enough to understand death conceptually, but still young enough to hope for miracles. Oh, sweetheart, I said gently, setting down my coffee cup and taking his small hand in mine. Remember what we talked about? Daddy can't come back. His body stopped working because of the stroke in his brain. Marcus nodded, eyes downcast. I know, but sometimes I forget when I first wake up. I keep thinking he'll come make pancakes like on Saturdays. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I know it's hard. I miss him too, every minute. Would you like me to make pancakes on Saturdays now? They wouldn't be the same, he mumbled, then quickly added, but I'd like that anyway. I was staying at Michael's house, my house now, according to the will, to help care for Marcus while Victoria dealt with important paperwork, as she'd vaguely explained. In reality, I suspected she was meeting with her own attorney to contest Michael's will. After dropping Marcus at school, I returned to find Victoria waiting in the kitchen. She'd let herself in with her key, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that conveyed businesslike mourning. Margaret, she greeted me with an air kiss that didn't reach her eyes. I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss arrangements going forward. Of course, I replied, maintaining the polite, somewhat deferential demeanor I'd decided to adopt. Would you like some coffee? Please. She seated herself at the kitchen island, watching as I moved around what was technically now my kitchen. This is all so overwhelming. The paperwork, the accounts, the decisions. I can only imagine, I murmured sympathetically, remembering the angry phone conversation I'd overheard. How can I help? Victoria's perfectly made-up face registered brief surprise at my accommodating tone, quickly replaced by calculated warmth. You're so kind, Margaret. Actually, I've been thinking about what makes the most sense for everyone, especially Marcus. Here it comes, I thought, keeping my expression open and receptive. This house has so many memories of Michael, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced tremor. Every room reminds Marcus of what he's lost. It might be healthier for him, for both of us, to make a fresh start somewhere else. I nodded thoughtfully while placing a mug of coffee before her. You're considering moving. I found a lovely condo downtown near the cultural district. Excellent schools nearby, walking distance to the art museum and library. She stirred her coffee deliberately. The thing is, Margaret, with the way Michael arranged things, I'll need your cooperation. Oh? I tilted my head questioningly, as if I hadn't already anticipated this conversation. The will situation is obviously some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Michael would never have intentionally put me in such a difficult position. Her tone hardened slightly before she caught herself. I've spoken with an attorney who suggests we could avoid lengthy legal proceedings if you'd simply transfer the house to me, as Michael would have wanted. I widened my eyes, projecting thoughtful consideration rather than the indignation I felt at her attempt to manipulate me using my son's supposed wishes. I see, I said slowly. And what does your attorney say about the fact that Michael updated his will only 4 months ago specifically to make these arrangements? A flash of irritation crossed her face before her mask of reasonable grief returned. Michael wasn't himself in recent months. He was working too hard, stressed about cases. He wasn't thinking clearly about our family's best interests. I nodded as if considering this explanation. That must have been difficult for you both. It was, she sighed dramatically. Which is why I believe he would want us to correct this oversight now, for Marcus's sake. The invocation of Marcus's welfare, her trump card, was deployed exactly as I'd expected. I took a deliberate sip of coffee, giving myself time to formulate my response. I understand your concern, I said finally. But making hasty decisions during grief isn't wise. Perhaps we should give ourselves some time to adjust before making major changes. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course you need time, but the condo I found won't be available long. It would be so much easier for Marcus if we could settle things quickly and let him start healing in a new environment. I recognized the sales tactic, creating artificial urgency to force a quick decision. Why don't we ask Marcus how he feels about moving? I suggested mildly. He might find comfort staying in the home where he has so many memories of his father. Children don't always know what's best for them, Victoria countered smoothly. That's why adults make these decisions. Besides, he's already dealing with enough emotional turmoil. I noted how skillfully she'd positioned herself as the protective parent while subtly suggesting I would harm Marcus by consulting him about his own feelings. You're probably right, I conceded, watching relief flash across her features. Let me think about everything for a few days. This has been such a shock. Of course, she agreed, clearly believing she'd made progress. Take the weekend. But Margaret, she added, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, I'm worried about finances with the way things stand. Michael handled everything, and now I'm finding credit card bills, the mortgage. The mortgage that was now my responsibility, according to the will. But I kept this observation to myself. I'd be happy to help review the household accounts, I offered, seizing the opportunity. Perhaps we could go through everything together. That's not necessary, she said quickly. I just meant that resolving the house situation would help me access the equity we've built for Marcus's education and well-being. The education fund that Michael had specifically placed under my control as trustee. Let's talk more next week, I suggested, rising as if our conversation had reassured rather than alarmed me. I should get some rest before picking up Marcus from school. After Victoria left, I sat alone in the quiet house, mentally reviewing our interaction. She clearly believed I was a grief-stricken, somewhat passive older woman who could be maneuvered into surrendering what Michael had entrusted to me. For now, I needed her to continue believing exactly that. I picked up my phone and called Daniel. I need to understand exactly what evidence Michael collected, I told him without preamble, and how we can gather more. This is going to be a longer game than I anticipated. Grandma, Mom says I have to go with her to Miami next weekend, but I don't want to. Marcus's troubled face looked up at me as I tucked him into bed 1 week after Michael's funeral. This was the first I'd heard of any Miami trip, which immediately raised red flags. Miami? I kept my voice casual while my mind raced. That sounds like an adventure. Marcus shook his head, clutching his stuffed dragon tighter. She says her friend Robert has a boat and will stay at a fancy hotel, but I have my science project due Monday and Dad always helped with my projects. I smoothed his hair gently. Have you told your mom about the science project? She said I can skip it. That teachers understand when your dad dies. His voice caught on the word. But Dad wouldn't want me to skip it. He always said commitments are important. Your father was right about that, I agreed, making a mental note of this conversation. Let me talk to your mom tomorrow. Maybe we can work something out. After Marcus fell asleep, I called Daniel at his home number, which he'd provided for urgent matters. Miami. Daniel's voice sharpened when I explained the situation. With Robert Kane. You know him? I asked, surprised. He's the real estate developer I mentioned. The one Michael had concerns about. Daniel's tone was carefully measured. Margaret, did you install the home security system I recommended? Yes, the technician finished today. I'd followed Daniel's advice to improve home security, though the underlying purpose was different than what a grieving family might normally need. Good. That recording capability may prove valuable. He paused. I'm sending you some materials from Michael's private file tomorrow by courier. Don't open the package where anyone might see you. The next morning, after taking Marcus to school, I received a sealed manila envelope. Inside were printouts of text messages between Victoria and someone saved in her phone as RK, dated from various points over the past 10 months. Michael had apparently gained access to her phone records through means I chose not to question, given his legal background. The messages painted a damning picture, an affair that had begun almost a year ago, plans made and broken, complaints about Michael working late, about feeling trapped in her marriage, references to Marcus as the complication in their relationship plans. If betrayal like this makes your blood boil, subscribe right now. If you excuse betrayal, defend it in the comments. Most disturbing were exchanges from just 3 months ago. RK, how long are we going to keep this limbo going? You said you were ready to leave. Victoria, patience. Michael's name is on everything important. Need to get financials in better position first. Working on it. RK, the Cayman property isn't going to wait forever. Perfect opportunity for fresh start. Victoria, trust me, few more months max. Everything will fall into place. I sat back, hands shaking slightly. These weren't just messages documenting an affair, they revealed Victoria had been planning to leave Michael, but wanted to secure financial assets first. Had Michael discovered these messages and changed his will in response? Is that why Victoria had been so shocked by the provisions? Another document in the package was a private investigator's report Michael had commissioned, containing photographs of Victoria and Robert Kane entering a hotel together, expense reports showing gifts he'd purchased for her, and background information on Kane's business dealings, some of which appeared ethically questionable. The final item was a handwritten note from Michael to Daniel, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Tom, enclosed is everything I've gathered. Not sure what my next steps should be. Confronting her could jeopardize my access to Marcus if things go badly. Need to protect him above all. Let's meet next Thursday to discuss options. Michael had died on a Tuesday. The meeting never happened. Armed with this knowledge, I approached my conversation with Victoria about the Miami trip strategically. I waited until she came to pick up Marcus's weekend bag that Friday afternoon. Marcus mentioned you're planning a trip to Miami. I kept my tone light, curious rather than confrontational. Just a quick weekend getaway, Victoria replied, checking her designer watch. Good for him to have a distraction. He's worried about missing his science project deadline, I mentioned casually. You know how Michael always emphasized academics. Victoria's smile tightened. A weekend off won't hurt his grades. Margaret, the school psychologist actually recommended new experiences to help process grief. I nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Though I wonder if a boat trip with Robert, might be a bit much so soon after losing his father. Marcus seems anxious about it. Her eyes narrowed slightly at my mention of Robert's name. Marcus will be fine. Children are adaptable. They certainly are, I agreed, though sometimes they need familiar routines during trauma. I'd be happy to keep him here to finish his project if that would help your plans. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing the freedom of a child-free weekend against maintaining the appearance of devoted motherhood. That's thoughtful but unnecessary, she said finally. This trip is about mother-son bonding. Of course, I conceded, then added innocently, oh, I've been meaning to ask. Do you know the password to Michael's home computer? Marcus was hoping to find some photos for a memory book his counselor suggested. I don't keep track of Michael's passwords, she said dismissively. Have Daniel check his office files. Another note for my growing mental catalog. Victoria claimed not to know Michael's passwords, information most spouses would share. One more thing, I said as she turned to leave. Marcus's teacher wants parent volunteers for their field trip to the Science Museum next Wednesday. Since I'm not officially a parent, I thought you might want to sign up. Children who've lost parents apparently find these outings especially difficult. It was a test, one I suspected she would fail. Wednesday I have an all-day spa appointment, she said without hesitation. I've been waiting weeks. Mental health care, she added with a performative sigh. You understand. Of course, I said sympathetically. Self-care is important during grief. I'll explain to Marcus's teacher. After she left with a promise to return Sunday evening with Marcus, I immediately called Daniel. She's taking Marcus to Miami with Robert Kane, I reported. I need to document this trip carefully. Already on it, Daniel assured me. I've engaged the same investigator Michael used. We'll have photographs of everything. Miami is actually helpful for our purposes, it shows her priorities clearly. And if Marcus is upset by the trip, I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Document his emotional state when he returns. Have him talk to his counselor about it. Every reaction becomes evidence. Daniel paused. Margaret, I know this is difficult, but... I understand, I interrupted. Building a case for Marcus's well-being meant carefully cataloging everything that threatened it. As I prepared for a weekend alone in Michael's house, I thought about the performance unfolding around us all. Victoria playing the grieving widow while planning escapes with her lover. Me playing the supportive mother-in-law while gathering evidence. Even Marcus unconsciously providing crucial insights through his innocent comments and reactions. The only person not performing was Michael, whose absence remained the most powerful presence in our lives. I touched the framed photo of him on the mantel. I'm watching, Michael, I whispered, just like you asked me to. And I'm learning more than Victoria realizes. Marcus returned from Miami with sunburned shoulders, a stomach ache from too much junk food, an emotional withdrawal that broke my heart. He trudged into the house Sunday evening, hours later than Victoria had promised, his small face tight with exhaustion. How was your trip, sweetheart? I asked, kneeling to his level as Victoria texted rapidly behind him. Marcus shrugged, eyes downcast. The boat made me sick. He's being dramatic, Victoria interjected without looking up from her screen. It was just a little motion sickness. The resort was 5-star. The weather was perfect. He had a wonderful time. Marcus's expression told a different story, but he remained silent, casting a quick glance at his mother before mumbling, "Can I go to my room?" "Of course," I said gently. "I'll bring up some ginger tea for your tummy in a few minutes." As he trudged upstairs, I noticed he wasn't carrying his backpack. Did Marcus forget his school bag? I asked. Sophia waved dismissively. It got wet on the boat. Nothing important in it. His science project materials were in that bag, I pointed out, carefully keeping accusation from my tone. He can get an extension. I'll write a note. She finally looked up from her phone, her expression daring me to challenge her. Robert sends his regards, by the way. He was disappointed you couldn't join us. The brazen mention of her lover made my stomach clench, but I maintained my facade of oblivious politeness. How thoughtful. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Very much, she replied, a hint of triumph in her smile. Robert has wonderful connections in Miami. We're considering investment opportunities there. How nice, I murmured, making a mental note. I should check on Marcus. Upstairs, I found my grandson sitting on his bed, staring at a photo of Michael on his nightstand. The room was exactly as he'd left it Friday, homework still spread across his desk, work he clearly hadn't touched all weekend. Want to tell me about the trip? I asked gently, sitting beside him. His lower lip trembled. Mom was on her phone the whole time. She and Robert talked about boring grown-up stuff and left me with the hotel babysitter most of the time. My heart sank. The whole time. He nodded miserably. 2 nights. The babysitter fell asleep watching TV, and I got scared because I didn't know where I was when I woke up. I called Mom's room, but she didn't answer. I kept my expression neutral while inwardly seething. That must have been frightening. Robert has a big boat, but he wouldn't let me touch anything. He said, kids mess things up. Marcus picked at a loose thread on his comforter. And Mom laughed when he said that, even though Dad always let me help steer our little boat. Each detail was another piece of evidence, another example of Victoria prioritizing her new relationship over her son's emotional needs. I made careful mental notes to record later in the journal Daniel had suggested I keep. Did you tell Mom you were scared or upset? I asked. Marcus shook his head. She was having fun. She told me in the car that it's important for her to be happy again and I shouldn't make things harder by complaining. The manipulation of making a 9-year-old responsible for his mother's happiness, especially one grieving his father, sent a surge of protective anger through me. I pushed it down, focusing instead on comforting Marcus. If you'd never abandon a grieving child like this, subscribe. If you would, confess in the comments. It's okay to have feelings about things, I told him, pulling him gently against my side. Even when grown-ups are having fun. Your feelings matter too. He leaned into me, his small body relaxing slightly. Dad always asked about my feelings. I know, sweetheart. I know. After getting Marcus settled with tea for his stomach and helping him salvage what we could of his science project, I documented the evening's revelations in my journal, adding them to the growing catalog of concerning behaviors. Daniel had explained that establishing patterns was crucial. Any single incident could be explained away, but consistent patterns of neglect or poor judgment would build our case. Over the next 3 weeks, those patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Victoria began staying out late without explanation, leaving Marcus with me more frequently. She missed his parent-teacher conference, sending me in her place with a vague excuse about estate meetings. She forgot to refill his asthma medication, necessitating an emergency pharmacy run when he had a mild attack during soccer practice. Each incident was meticulously documented in my journal. Each one showed a mother increasingly detached from her son's daily needs. While I stepped in to fill the void, I was careful not to criticize Victoria directly to Marcus, focusing instead on providing the stability and attention he craved. The security system I'd installed captured telling moments, Victoria bringing Robert to the house late one evening, both slightly intoxicated, unaware that Marcus was awake and witnessed their intimate behavior in the kitchen, Sophia instructing Marcus to remember to tell Grandma you had a great time today, after a rushed outing where she'd spent most of the time on business calls, multiple instances of her promising Marcus she'd attend his activities, then canceling at the last minute. My performance as the supportive, somewhat naive mother-in-law continued throughout. I offered to help with Marcus's care in ways that seemed generous rather than strategic. I expressed understanding when Victoria claimed grief brain for forgotten commitments. I avoided confrontation when she made thinly veiled comments about moving forward with selling the house. "Margaret, we need to discuss the house situation," she said one evening, 4 weeks after Michael's death. She'd arrived unexpectedly while I was helping Marcus with homework, dressed for what was clearly a dinner date rather than a mother-son evening. "Of course," I replied amiably. "I've been meaning to ask what items you'd like to keep when I move in permanently next month." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. "Move in? I thought we agreed the house should be sold." "Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that," I said mildly. "Actually, I've been thinking it's best for Marcus to maintain stability right now. His therapist mentioned how important familiar environments are during grief." Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced a concerned smile. "I'm worried about you, Margaret. This house is far too large for you to manage alone, and the financial burden, the mortgage, utilities, maintenance." "Michael left the house free and clear," I mentioned casually, watching her reaction. "No mortgage to worry about, and I'm more capable than I look. All those years managing a university department taught me quite a bit about handling complex responsibilities." Something shifted in her assessment of me, a recalculation I could almost see happening behind her eyes. I'd revealed myself as slightly more formidable than she'd assumed, yet still maintained my helpful, non-threatening demeanor. "We'll discuss it more later," she said finally. "I need to run. Important dinner meeting. Marcus has already eaten, and he should be in bed by 9. After she left, I sat with Marcus at the kitchen table, helping him rebuild the science project whose materials had been lost in Miami. As he carefully glued pieces of his solar system model together, he looked up suddenly. "Grandma, are you going to live here now instead of Mom?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, focusing intently on positioning Mars at the correct distance from his styrofoam sun. "Mom told someone on the phone that you're trying to take the house from her. She said you were being selfish." I chose my words carefully. "Your dad wanted to make sure we all had safe places to live. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about the details." "I want you to stay," he said simply. "You help me with homework and remember my medicine and make real food instead of just ordering pizza." His straightforward assessment, so innocent yet so perceptive, reinforced my determination. This wasn't just about following Michael's wishes anymore. It was about protecting a child who clearly recognized, even at 9, the difference between performative parenting and genuine care. "I'll do my very best to stay close no matter what," I promised him. It was the only promise I could make with absolute certainty while the larger battle continued to unfold around us. "I'm thinking of taking Marcus to my parents in Colorado for a few weeks." Victoria's announcement over morning coffee nearly 5 weeks after Michael's death seemed casual, but the timing set off immediate alarm bells. I had just informed her that Daniel needed to meet with us again regarding additional estate matters. "Colorado," I kept my voice neutral while stirring my coffee. "That's quite a distance. What about Marcus's school?" Victoria waved dismissively. "He can miss a few weeks. Children are resilient." Michael's favorite phrase, "children are resilient," sounded hollow coming from her lips, a convenient excuse rather than a thoughtful observation. "When were you thinking of going?" I asked, mentally calculating how this might align with the increasingly urgent timeline Daniel had mentioned. "Next week, ideally," she checked her expensive watch. "My parents have been begging to see him, and frankly, I could use the support system. Being a sudden single mother is overwhelming." I bit back the observation that she'd been essentially a single mother by choice for months, given how often she'd delegated Marcus's care to Michael and me. "That's understandable," I said instead. "Though I wonder if such a big trip might be difficult for Marcus right now." He's just getting back into his school routine, and his grief counselor mentioned consistency is important. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting I don't know what's best for my own son? Not at all, I backpedaled, maintaining my non-threatening persona. Just thinking out loud. I'm sure you've considered everything carefully. I have. Her tone softened, becoming almost conspiratorial. Actually, Margaret, I wanted to discuss something important with you. Could we have dinner tonight? Just the two of us. I'll have Richard's assistant watch Marcus. I raised an eyebrow. Richard's assistant. Melissa, she corrected smoothly. She's wonderful with children. She's helped with Marcus before. Another detail for my journal. Victoria was leaving Marcus with her lover's assistant rather than his grandmother who lived 15 minutes away. I'd be happy to watch him, I offered. But dinner sounds lovely. What did you want to discuss? Everything, she said vaguely. The house, Marcus's future, how we move forward from here. I think I've come up with a solution that works for everyone. Her confident smile suggested she believed she'd formulated an irresistible proposal. The restaurant she'd chosen was deliberately impressive, the kind with minimalist decor, tiny portions, and prices designed to intimidate. Victoria was already seated when I arrived, looking elegant in a designer dress that managed to suggest tasteful mourning while remaining fashionable. Margaret, thank you for coming. She greeted me with an air kiss. I ordered us a bottle of Dom Perignon. Michael always said it was your favorite. It wasn't. Michael knew I preferred simple Chardonnay, but the manufactured intimacy was part of her performance. How thoughtful, I murmured, settling into my chair, though I rarely indulged even before Michael's passing. She poured champagne anyway, raising her glass in a toast to new beginnings and solutions. I sipped politely, waiting as she established the atmosphere she wanted, convivial, generous, warmly intimate. The manipulation was textbook: create a pleasing environment, establish rapport, suggest shared understanding before making your pitch. Margaret, she began after our appetizers arrived, these past weeks have been so difficult for all of us. Losing Michael, trying to help Marcus cope, dealing with all the practical matters. I nodded encouragingly, playing my role. I've been thinking about what truly matters, she continued, her voice taking on practiced sincerity. Family, security, peace of mind. And I think I've found a way for all of us to have what we need. I'm listening, I said, cutting a small piece of my overpriced scallop. You and I both know Michael's will has created complications. She delicately sipped her champagne. The house, the vehicles, the accounts. It's all rather awkward, isn't it? Not at all what Michael would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly. I remained silent, letting her continue her pitch uninterrupted. I've spoken with an excellent estate attorney who specializes in these situations. He believes we could easily contest the will based on Michael's mental state in those final months, the stress he was under, the medications for his heart condition. It wouldn't be difficult to demonstrate diminished capacity. My heart clenched at how casually she suggested invalidating my son's final wishes, but I kept my expression neutral. But litigation is so unpleasant, she continued smoothly. Creates divisions, drags on for months or years. Not what Marcus needs right now. Absolutely not, I agreed, wondering where this performance was heading. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. So I've come up with a better solution, one that gives us both what we want without any messy legal battles. And what would that be? I asked, genuinely curious about her strategy. You transfer the house and vehicles back to me as Michael's widow, she explained as if offering a tremendous favor. In exchange, I'll guarantee you can see Marcus regularly. Perhaps every other weekend, major holidays. I'll even put it in writing. The breathtaking audacity of her offer, essentially ransoming my own grandson, almost made me lose my carefully maintained composure. She was proposing I surrender everything Michael had legally left me in exchange for permission to see Marcus, rights I already had as his grandmother. That's quite a proposition, I managed, taking another sip of champagne to hide my reaction. I know it's generous, she agreed, misinterpreting my hesitation as consideration. Most women in my position would fight for everything, but I value your relationship with Marcus. And frankly, I could use the help occasionally. Occasionally, I echoed, picking up on the telling word choice. Well, single motherhood is demanding, she sighed dramatically. And I do have my career to consider. Plus, Richard and I, she stopped herself, recalibrating. That is, I'll eventually want to rebuild my personal life. Having guaranteed childcare arrangements would be tremendously helpful. There it was, the real motivation. Not Marcus's well-being, but convenient childcare arrangements that would allow her to pursue her relationship with Robert unencumbered. What about Marcus's trust fund? I asked innocently. Would that remain as Michael arranged it? A flash of irritation crossed her features before she smiled again. That's unnecessarily complicated too. As his mother, I should have control over his educational expenses. Children's needs change, require flexibility. If this heartless bargain disgusts you, subscribe without hesitation. If you see nothing wrong, say it in the comments. They certainly do, I agreed, thinking of all the ways Marcus's needs had been ignored in recent weeks. So, she said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a folded document, I took the liberty of having my attorney draft a simple agreement. You transfer the assets back where they belong, I guarantee your visitation rights. Clean, simple, everyone wins. She slid the paper across the table with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. I took it, scanning the language that would effectively undo everything Michael had arranged to protect Marcus and me. This is quite thorough, I commented, buying time while formulating my response. And what about Colorado? Would Marcus and I still have our visits if you move? About that, she said, her expression turning regretful. The Colorado trip might become more permanent. Richard has development opportunities there, excellent private schools for Marcus. It would be a fresh start for everyone. Conveniently far from me and anyone else who knew Michael or might question her parenting. I'll need to think about this, I said, folding the document and placing it in my purse. Perhaps have Daniel review it, since he's familiar with Michael's wishes. Her smile tightened. I wouldn't involve Daniel. He's rather old-fashioned about these matters. My attorney assures me this is completely standard. I nodded thoughtfully. Even so, such an important decision deserves careful consideration. Michael always taught me not to sign anything without proper review. She couldn't argue with invoking Michael's advice without seeming disrespectful, so she merely smiled and signaled for the check. Of course, take a few days. But Margaret, she added, her voice taking on a subtle edge, this really is the best solution for everyone. Fighting me on this would only hurt Marcus in the long run. The thinly veiled threat hung between us as she paid for our expensive meal with what I suspected was Michael's credit card. As I drove home, my hands finally allowed themselves to shake on the steering wheel. The audacity, the manipulation, the casual way she planned to separate Marcus from his remaining connections to Michael, it all confirmed what I'd been documenting for weeks. I called Daniel from my car. She's planning to take Marcus to Colorado permanently, I said without preamble. And she's offered me a devil's bargain to get the house and accounts. Perfect, Daniel replied, surprising me. This is exactly what we needed. Bring the document to my office first thing tomorrow. It's time to move to the next phase. She actually put it in writing. Daniel shook his head in amazement as he reviewed the document Victoria had given me. We sat in his office early the next morning, coffee growing cold as we dissected her proposition. This is essentially a confession, he continued, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. She's explicitly stating she'll allow you to see Marcus only if you transfer assets to her that are legally yours. That's textbook coercion. And this part about Colorado? I pointed to the clause mentioning reasonable visitation regardless of primary residence location. Establishes premeditation for removing Marcus from his support system and familiar environment during grief. Daniel added another highlight. Combined with the evidence we've gathered of her parenting patterns, this creates a compelling narrative. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. So what happens now? Daniel set down his marker, expression turning serious. It's time to execute the contingency plan Michael put in place. He hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but he prepared for this exact scenario. From his desk drawer, Daniel withdrew a sealed envelope marked Emergency Protocol in Michael's handwriting. My heart constricted at the sight of my son's familiar script. Michael left detailed instructions about when and how to proceed if Victoria's behavior threatened Marcus's well-being or attempted to separate him from you. Daniel opened the envelope carefully. The key component is a petition for emergency custody modification. Custody modification. I repeated, stunned. Michael wanted me to seek custody of Marcus. Temporary custody initially, Daniel clarified. Based on documented evidence of parental neglect and the child's best interests during grief. Michael believed, and I concur, that a judge would likely award you temporary guardianship while a more permanent arrangement is determined. My hands trembled slightly. The responsibility Michael had entrusted to me was enormous. I'm 67, Daniel. Would a court really consider me as a guardian over Marcus's mother? Age isn't disqualifying, especially given your demonstrated involvement in his life. And remember, we're not alleging Victoria is unfit in the traditional sense. We're demonstrating that her current priorities and choices are detrimental to Marcus's emotional well-being during a critical period. Daniel laid out the evidence we'd accumulated, my detailed journal documenting Victoria's absences and Marcus's reactions, the home security footage showing multiple concerning incidents, statements from Marcus's teachers about missed conferences and incomplete homework, notes from his grief counselor about regression and anxiety that coincided with Victoria's increased absences. Photographic evidence of the Miami trip with Robert while Marcus was left with hotel staff, and now the damning document proposing to use Marcus as leverage. We'll need one more piece, Daniel explained. A neutral third-party evaluation of Marcus's home environment and emotional state. I've arranged for a court-approved child psychologist to interview Marcus tomorrow at his school. Standard procedure in these cases. Nothing that would alarm Victoria if she heard about it. The methodical way Michael had prepared for this contingency broke my heart all over again. How long had he been concerned about Victoria's parenting? How much had he witnessed before deciding such drastic measures might be necessary? When would we file the petition? I asked, trying to focus on practical matters rather than my swirling emotions. Immediately after receiving the psychologist's report, assuming it supports our position. Likely within 48 hours. Daniel's expression softened slightly. Margaret, are you prepared for what comes next? Victoria will not take this lying down. She'll be furious, possibly vindictive. I thought of Marcus's small face when he returned from Miami, the way he'd confided that his mother had left him with strangers overnight, how he'd clutched his father's photo while trying not to cry. I thought of Michael, who had foreseen this situation and trusted me to protect his son when he no longer could. I'm prepared, I said firmly. What's our next step? Maintain your current approach with Victoria. Don't let on that anything has changed. If she presses for an answer about her proposition, tell her you're still considering it and have questions about some details. As I left Daniel's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Need your answer by tomorrow. Colorado arrangements pending. Important opportunity for Marcus's future. The transparent attempt to create artificial urgency only strengthened my resolve. I typed a carefully calibrated response, still reviewing. Have some questions about the visitation schedule. Can we discuss tomorrow evening? Her reply came immediately, "Fine. 7 p.m. at the house. We'll have Robert's attorney present to answer any concerns." Robert's attorney, not James's, not a neutral party, not even her own independent counsel. Another telling detail for our documentation. I spent the afternoon with Marcus after school, helping with homework and listening as he reluctantly described an incident that morning when Victoria had forgotten to pack his lunch, then berated him for calling to remind her because she was in an important meeting. I recorded these details in my journal immediately after he went upstairs to play, noting his dejected posture and the way he'd minimized his mother's reaction, clearly accustomed to managing her emotions rather than his own. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. The school psychologist met with Marcus today during lunch, he informed me without preamble. Her preliminary findings are significant. Marcus demonstrated elevated anxiety when discussing his home environment, particular concern about being sent away to Colorado, and clear attachment to you as his primary source of emotional support. Is that enough? I asked, hope rising cautiously. Combined with our other evidence, yes. I'm filing the emergency petition first thing tomorrow morning. The judge I've requested typically rules on these matters within 24 hours. Should I tell Marcus anything? I worried about preparing him for the potential upheaval. Not yet, Daniel advised. Children his age struggle with keeping sensitive information private. For now, maintain normal routines. If the judge rules in our favor, we'll have a child specialist help explain the situation appropriately. I slept fitfully that night, torn between hope that Marcus might be protected from Victoria's neglect and anxiety about the conflict that would inevitably erupt. By morning, my resolve had strengthened. This wasn't about my preferences or even about honoring Michael's wishes anymore. It was about a vulnerable child whose mother was making choices that compounded rather than helped his grief. Daniel called at 10:23 a.m., the petition has been filed. Judge Morrison has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Victoria will be served notice this afternoon. So soon. I hadn't expected things to move so quickly. Judge Morrison takes child welfare cases seriously, especially when there's evidence of potential parental flight risk. Victoria's Colorado plans raised red flags. I thought about my scheduled 7 p.m. meeting with Victoria and Robert's attorney that evening. Should I still meet with Victoria tonight as planned? Absolutely not, Daniel said firmly. Once she's served the court papers, you should have no direct contact except through legal representatives. Go to a hotel tonight if necessary. She'll likely be extremely volatile when she realizes what's happening. What about Marcus? Worry for my grandson overrode all other concerns. The petition includes a provision for Marcus to remain in his current home environment with you present until the hearing. The server will explain that to Victoria. Daniel paused. Margaret, this is going to get complicated quickly. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared? I thought of Michael's letter, of his trust in me, of Marcus's increasingly anxious behavior. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You scheming, manipulative witch. Victoria's voice exploded through my phone hours after she'd been served with the emergency custody petition. I held the device away from my ear, her rage so incandescent it seemed to radiate through the speaker. How dare you try to steal my son after everything I've done for you? Her words tumbled out in furious bursts. My attorneys will destroy you. You'll never see Marcus again when this is over. Following Daniel's advice, I remained silent, letting her fury spend itself without engagement. Eventually, she seemed to register my lack of response. Are you there? Say something, she demanded. On the advice of counsel, I can't discuss this matter directly with you, I finally replied, keeping my voice calm and neutral. I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow. You'll regret this, she hissed before the line went dead. I leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly exhausted. The court server had arrived at precisely 2 p.m., delivering the petition papers to Victoria at her office. Daniel had arranged for Marcus to be with me after school, sparing him from witnessing his mother's inevitable explosion. Now, as evening approached, I faced the challenge of maintaining normalcy for Marcus while preparing for tomorrow's hearing. He sat at the dining room table, focused on a math worksheet, blissfully unaware of the legal storm gathering around him. "Grandma, can we have spaghetti for dinner?" he asked, looking up from his multiplication problems. "The kind with your special sauce?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, grateful for the distraction of ordinary tasks. "Would you like to help me make it?" As we chopped onions and stirred sauce, I studied my grandson's face, searching for signs of additional stress. Victoria had called him earlier, her voice tight but controlled, explaining that she had an unexpected work emergency and he would stay with me tonight. Marcus had accepted this explanation without question, accustomed to his mother's frequent absences. "Mom sounded mad on the phone," he observed suddenly, sprinkling cheese over his portion of spaghetti. "Is she mad at me?" "No, absolutely not," I assured him quickly. "Grown-ups sometimes get frustrated about work things. It has nothing to do with you." He nodded, seeming relieved but not entirely convinced. "She said she'd take me to get ice cream tomorrow to make up for missing our dinner, but she forgot last time she promised that." Another small piece of evidence, broken promises becoming so routine that a 9-year-old had learned to expect disappointment. After putting Marcus to bed with extra stories and reassurance, I called Daniel for final preparation. "How's Marcus?" he asked immediately. "Managing," I replied. "Unaware of what's happening, as far as I can tell." Victoria called him briefly but kept her composure. "Good. Children are perceptive, but there's no need for him to shoulder adult concerns." Daniel's voice took on its professional tone. "For tomorrow, I've prepared a summary document of all evidence for Judge Morrison. The psychological evaluation came back strongly supportive of our position." "What should I expect at the hearing?" I asked, trying to prepare myself mentally. "Judge Morrison runs a tight courtroom. This is a preliminary emergency hearing, so testimony will be limited. You'll likely be asked about your observations of Marcus's well-being and your capacity to provide temporary care. Victoria will have opportunity to respond to the allegations. Will Marcus need to appear?" The thought of my grandson being questioned in court made my stomach clench. "No. Judge Morrison has reviewed the psychologist's report and specifically excluded Marcus from this initial hearing. If a full custody investigation proceeds, he may eventually speak with the judge in chambers, but that would be weeks from now." I exhaled in relief. "And Robert Kane, will he be involved?" "Legally, no standing. Practically, he's paying for Victoria's high-powered attorney, so his influence will be present." Daniel paused. "Margaret, prepare yourself. These hearings can get ugly. Victoria's likely strategy will be to paint you as a grief-deranged, controlling mother-in-law trying to steal her child." "I understand," I said, though my heart raced at the thought of public accusations. "What matters is Marcus." "Exactly. Focus on that tomorrow. No matter what Victoria or her attorney claim, remember why we're doing this." Sleep proved elusive that night. I checked on Marcus repeatedly, watching his peaceful breathing and wondering how tomorrow's decision would affect the rest of his childhood. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute, dressed in a conservative navy suit that Daniel had advised would convey stability and trustworthiness to the court. "Why are you dressed up, Grandma?" Marcus asked over breakfast, eyeing my unusual formal attire. "I have an important meeting," I explained, helping him pack his backpack. "Mrs. Chen from next door will take you to school today, and either Mom or I will pick you up this afternoon." He accepted this with the flexibility of childhood, more concerned about whether his favorite shirt was clean than about the day's unusual arrangements. I hugged him extra tight at Mrs. Chen's door, wishing I could shield him from the uncertainty ahead. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all marble and echoing hallways. Daniel met me at the entrance, his expression professionally composed but with worry lines visible around his eyes. Victoria is already inside with her attorney, Gerald Matthews from Sterling and Associates, one of the most aggressive family law firms in the city. I nodded, unsurprised that Robert had secured top legal representation. And our chances? Judge Morrison is fair but cautious. The evidence is compelling, but temporary custody removal is still an extraordinary remedy. Daniel squeezed my arm reassuringly. Remember, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about ensuring Marcus has proper support during a critical time. Inside the courtroom, Victoria sat at a table with a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. She wore a conservative black dress, hair pulled back modestly, a stark contrast to her usual fashionable appearance. The transformation into grieving, devoted widow and mother was complete, down to the framed photo of Michael and Marcus placed prominently before her. Her eyes met mine with glacial hatred as I entered, before she quickly adjusted her expression to wounded confusion, leaning to whisper something to her attorney. The performance had begun. Judge Morrison, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, entered promptly at 9 a.m. Her no-nonsense demeanor suggested little patience for dramatics as she reviewed the file before her. This is an emergency hearing regarding temporary custody modification for minor child Marcus Harrison, she stated, looking over her reading glasses at both tables. I've reviewed the petition and supporting documentation. Let's proceed efficiently. For the next hour, Daniel presented our case methodically, the documented patterns of neglect, Victoria's increasing absences, the Miami trip incidents, the psychological evaluation, and finally, the damning proposition document showing Victoria's attempt to use Marcus as leverage. Gerald Matthews countered with equal efficiency, portraying me as an interfering mother-in-law exploiting a grieving widow's temporary struggles, suggesting my obsessive documentation demonstrated unhealthy fixation, and painting Victoria as a devoted mother temporarily overwhelmed by extraordinary circumstances. Your Honor, Matthews concluded smoothly, Mrs. Harrison has kept her grandson overnight precisely 19 times since her son's death, at Miss Jensen's request to help during this adjustment period. This doesn't demonstrate neglect. It shows a mother wisely accepting support while processing her grief. The Colorado opportunity represents a fresh start, not abandonment of support systems. When my turn came to speak directly, I focused on Marcus rather than Victoria, describing concrete examples of his anxiety, his academic struggles since Michael's death, and the stability I'd attempted to provide. Your Honor, I said, meeting the judge's evaluating gaze, I'm not seeking to replace Victoria as Marcus's mother. I'm asking for temporary measures to ensure his needs are prioritized during an exceptionally vulnerable time in his development. The evidence suggests that currently, other priorities are taking precedence over those needs. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions of both sides, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, she announced she would review the evidence in chambers and return with her decision in 1 hour. The 60-minute wait in the courthouse hallway seemed eternal. Victoria and her attorney conferred in hushed tones at one end, while Daniel and I sat silently at the other. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs felt leaden as I rose to hear the decision that would determine Marcus's immediate future. Judge Morrison wasted no time on preliminaries. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find sufficient cause for emergency intervention in the current custody arrangement, she stated, her voice firm and authoritative. Temporary guardianship of minor child Marcus Harrison is hereby granted to Margaret Harrison for a period of 60 days, during which a full evaluation of the family situation will be conducted by court-appointed specialists. If justice here gave you hope, hit subscribe now. If not, explain why in the comments. I exhaled shakily as she continued outlining the details. Victoria would have supervised visitation 3 times weekly, neither party could remove Marcus from the jurisdiction, and a comprehensive family assessment would begin immediately. Across the courtroom, Victoria's composed facade cracked completely, her face contorted with fury as she turned to her attorney, whisper shouting accusations and demands for appeal. Judge Morrison observed this reaction with a raised eyebrow before adding a final comment. Ms. Jensen, your reaction to this temporary ruling concerns me. I strongly advise you to use the coming evaluation period to demonstrate the mature parenting capacity your son needs rather than focusing on personal grievances. With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded, "Court adjourned." As we left the courtroom, Victoria blocked our path, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with angry tears. "This isn't over," she hissed, ignoring her attorney's restraining hand on her arm. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." Daniel stepped between us. "Ms. Jensen, all communications should go through counsel from this point. We'll coordinate Marcus's pickup from school today and arrange the first supervised visitation." As Victoria was led away by her increasingly concerned attorney, I leaned against the wall, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over me. I had temporary custody of my grandson. Michael's concerns had been validated by a court of law. Marcus would be protected, at least for now. What happens next? I asked Daniel, my voice barely steady. "We pick up Marcus from school, explain the situation as gently as possible with the help of his counselor, and begin establishing a stable routine." He touched my shoulder supportively. "The hard part is just beginning, Margaret, but for today at least, Marcus is safe." "Grandma, is Mom ever coming back?" Marcus's question pierced my heart as we sat on the porch swing 7 weeks after the emergency custody hearing. His small legs dangled, not quite reaching the floor as he stared at the driveway where Victoria's car would normally appear for her supervised visits she had attended only sporadically over the past month and a half. "Your mom is going through a difficult time," I answered carefully, choosing words the family therapist had suggested. "She loves you, but sometimes adults struggle with big changes." Marcus nodded with wisdom beyond his 9 years. "Like when Dad died and she started staying out late all the time." His perception sometimes startled me. Children notice so much more than we give them credit for. "Something like that," I agreed, pulling him closer. "How are you feeling about everything?" He considered this seriously, brow furrowed in concentration. "Sad sometimes, but not scared anymore." "Scared?" I prompted gently. "When Mom talked about Colorado, I was scared all the time," he admitted. "I didn't want to leave my school and my friends and you. And I didn't like Robert. He always talked to me like I was stupid or invisible." Each of these revelations was carefully noted in my ongoing documentation. The court-appointed evaluator had been meeting with Marcus weekly, and with me and Victoria separately. The comprehensive assessment Judge Morrison had ordered was nearing completion, with the final custody hearing scheduled for next week. The 7 weeks since gaining temporary guardianship had been both challenging and healing. Marcus had initially been confused and upset when we explained the new arrangement, but his counselor had helped frame it as a special time with Grandma while Mom sorts out grown-up problems. The stability of routine, regular meals, consistent bedtimes, homework help, and predictable expectations had gradually eased his anxiety. Victoria's reaction had been volatile and erratic. She attended the first few supervised visits with obvious resentment, spending much of the time on her phone or asking Marcus leading questions about whether he was happy or if I was being mean to him. Then she canceled 3 visits in a row, claiming work emergencies. When she returned, her approach had shifted to bringing expensive gifts and making elaborate promises about future trips and experiences. The most telling visit had been 4 weeks ago when she arrived with Robert Kane unexpectedly in tow, attempting to circumvent the court order specifying who could be present. When the visitation supervisor refused to allow Robert to join, Victoria had stormed out, leaving Marcus in tears and without the visit he'd been anticipating all week. She hadn't come for the past 3 scheduled visits at all. "Do you think you'll feel ready for the talk with the judge next week?" I asked Marcus, referring to the in-chambers conversation Judge Morrison had scheduled. The therapist had been preparing him, explaining that the judge simply wanted to hear his thoughts and feelings, not force him to choose between his mother and grandmother. I guess so, he replied, kicking his feet rhythmically. Dr. Peterson said I just have to tell the truth about what makes me feel safe and happy. That's exactly right, I assured him, though my own stomach nodded at the thought of Marcus facing such adult responsibilities. The next day brought an unexpected development. Daniel called early in the morning, his usually measured tone edged with urgency. Margaret, Victoria's attorney, just filed a motion to dismiss the custody case. They're requesting an immediate return to the original arrangement with no restrictions. My hand tightened on the phone. On what grounds? They're claiming the evidence was manufactured, that you manipulated Marcus into making statements against his mother, and that Victoria's parenting decisions were reasonable responses to grief. My heart sank. Do they have any chance of succeeding? Ordinarily, I'd say no. Our documentation is too thorough, the psychological evaluation too clear. Daniel paused. But there's a complication. Robert Kane has connections with Judge Patterson, who's been assigned to hear this motion while Judge Morrison is on medical leave. The implications were clear. Money and influence could potentially override weeks of careful evidence gathering and professional evaluations. What can we do? I asked, trying to keep panic from my voice. I'm filing counter-motions immediately. But Margaret, there's something else you should know. Our investigator reports that Victoria and Robert have put deposits on property in the Bahamas, a jurisdiction with limited enforcement of U.S. custody orders. The threat crystallized with horrifying clarity. If Victoria regained custody, even temporarily, she could potentially take Marcus out of the country to a place where our legal protections would be difficult to enforce. She wouldn't, I began, then stopped myself. Of course she would. Everything I'd learned about Victoria in these weeks confirmed she viewed Marcus primarily as an accessory to the life she wanted, not as a vulnerable child with his own needs. I'm implementing additional safeguards, Daniel assured me. I've requested an emergency hearing with Judge Morrison upon her return next week. In the meantime, document everything. Any communications from Victoria, any reactions from Marcus, anything unusual at all. That evening, as Marcus worked on a school project about family traditions, my phone chimed with a text from Victoria, "We need to talk privately without lawyers. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Central Park. Come alone or deals off." I showed the message to Daniel immediately, who advised against meeting her without witnesses. This is exactly the kind of end run around proper channels that concerns me, he warned. Against his advice, I arranged to meet Victoria, but not alone. Daniel would be nearby, out of sight but within earshot, and I would record our conversation as permitted by our state's one-party consent laws. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few mothers with toddlers at the distant playground. Victoria sat on a bench overlooking the lake, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, her posture rigidly composed. "Thank you for coming," she said as I approached, her tone unexpectedly subdued. "I imagine your attack dog lawyer advised against it." "I'm here because any resolution that helps Marcus is worth exploring," I replied neutrally, taking a seat beside her while maintaining distance. Victoria was silent for a long moment, watching the ducks glide across the water. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "I'm dropping the custody case." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't among them. "What?" "You heard me." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes ringed with uncharacteristic fatigue. "I'm signing over full custody to you. No more court battles. No more supervised visits. No more evaluations and judgments." I studied her face, searching for the manipulation behind this sudden capitulation. "Why?" "Robert and I are moving to the Bahamas next month. He secured development rights for a major resort property." She spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing a change in dinner plans rather than abandoning her child. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime. We'll be there at least 4 years establishing the project. If walking away from your own child horrifies you, subscribe. If you agree with her choice, admit it in the comments. And Marcus? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shrugged slightly. Marcus needs stability, structure, all those things the evaluators keep emphasizing. I can't provide that right now, not with the demands of relocating and launching a major development. The clinical detachment with which she discussed leaving her son, her only child, who had just lost his father, left me momentarily speechless. So you're just walking away? I finally managed. I prefer to think of it as making the mature, responsible choice. Her tone suggested she expected praise for this decision. I'm putting Marcus's needs first by recognizing you're better positioned to meet them right now. Right now, I echoed. For the foreseeable future, she clarified. I'll send support payments, of course. Make video calls when possible. Perhaps he could visit during school holidays eventually. The casual way she outlined transitioning from mother to distant relative made my heart ache for Marcus. Yet, beneath my sadness was profound relief. Marcus would be spared further custody battles, further disappointments, further insecurity about his future. What do you want from me? I asked directly, sensing there must be conditions to this offer. A clean break, she replied immediately. No contested hearings, no forensic financial investigations, no further intrusion into my personal affairs. Sign the agreement my lawyer is drafting, and Marcus stays with you while I start fresh. And the house. Michael's accounts. I wasn't concerned about material assets, but I wanted to understand her complete proposition. Keep them, she said with a dismissive wave. Robert's development will make those look like pocket change. I just want this chapter closed cleanly and quickly. As she outlined the details of her proposed arrangement, I maintained a neutral expression while inwardly marveling at the outcome Michael had somehow foreseen. His careful planning, transferring assets to me, documenting Victoria's behavior, establishing trust for Marcus, had anticipated exactly this scenario, Victoria choosing her own desires over her son's needs when forced to face the responsibilities of genuine parenting. 1 week later, I sat in Judge Morrison's chambers as she reviewed the voluntary custody agreement Victoria had signed the day before departing for the Bahamas with Robert. This is an unusual resolution, the judge commented, studying the document carefully. Ms. Jensen is surrendering all parental rights except for limited visitation at your discretion. She believes it's in Marcus's best interest while she relocates internationally for an extended period, I explained, using the diplomatic phrasing Daniel had suggested. Judge Morrison's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by this characterization, but she nodded slowly. And you're prepared to assume full legal guardianship of your grandson at your age, Mrs. Harrison? Without hesitation, I replied firmly. Marcus needs stability, love, and connection to his father's memory. I can provide all three. The judge studied me thoughtfully before signing the final orders. Based on all evidence presented throughout these proceedings, as well as Miss Jensen's voluntary relinquishment, custody of Marcus Harrison is hereby granted to Margaret Harrison, with arrangements for support payments and limited visitation as outlined in the agreement. Outside the courthouse, with Marcus waiting at home with the kind neighbor who'd helped us throughout this journey, I finally allowed myself to absorb the magnitude of what had happened. I had become, in every meaningful sense, my grandson's parent, a role I had never anticipated at 67, but one I embraced with complete commitment. Michael would be proud, Daniel said quietly as we walked to our cars. He protected Marcus the only way he could, by entrusting him to you. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus and I planted a memorial garden in the backyard. Michael's favorite flowers and plants arranged around a small stone bench where we could sit and talk to Dad whenever Marcus felt the need. Do you think Dad knew Mom would leave? Marcus asked as we patted soil around a young rose bush. The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. I think your father knew that sometimes adults make choices based on what they want rather than what children need, I answered carefully. And he wanted to make sure you'd always have someone who put you first. Marcus nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. I miss Dad every day, but I don't miss how things were after he died when Mom was always angry or gone. Your dad made sure you'd be taken care of, I said, pulling him into a gentle hug. And that's exactly what I intend to do, for as long as you need me. That evening, as Marcus slept peacefully upstairs, I sat in Michael's study, now a shared space where Marcus did homework while I handled household management, and opened the small box of personal items Daniel had delivered after the final custody arrangement. Inside was one last letter from my son, marked, "When it's resolved." Mom. If you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't, protected Marcus from a situation I saw deteriorating but couldn't fix in time. I watched Victoria's priorities shift, saw her resentment of family responsibilities grow, noticed her increasing absences. When I discovered her relationship with Robert, I realized Marcus would eventually become collateral damage in her pursuit of the life she really wanted. I'm sorry for the burden I placed on you. Asking a mother to step in as parent again at your age wasn't fair, but I knew you would do it without hesitation. Just as you've always put family first. Marcus couldn't ask for a better guardian, a more loving presence, or a stronger advocate. If Michael's final words touched you, subscribe now. If they didn't, say why in the comments. Tell him stories about me. Not just the good ones, the real ones. About my mistakes and how I tried to fix them. About how sometimes we see the truth too late, but we do the best we can with the time we have. I love you both more than words can express. Michael. I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing freely now that Marcus couldn't see. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined, the grief of losing Michael compounded by the battles with Victoria and the challenge of helping Marcus heal from multiple traumas. Yet, as I looked around the home we now shared permanently, at the evidence of a child growing secure and loved, homework spread across the table, soccer cleats by the door, artwork taped proudly to the refrigerator, I knew Michael had been right to trust me with his most precious legacy. Through his foresight in changing his will, through my careful documentation and strategic patience, through Marcus's remarkable resilience, we had created something beautiful from tragedy, a new family constellation, different than what any of us had expected, but solid and true. Some might call it justice, that Victoria had ultimately chosen freedom over motherhood, revealing precisely the character Michael had anticipated. But I preferred to think of it as redemption, the chance to honor my son by raising his child with the values he cherished, ensuring that despite everything, love would have the final word in our story. 3 years later. Grandma, I got the lead in the school play. Marcus burst through the front door, his 12-year-old energy filling the house as he dropped his backpack and thrust a script into my hands. 3 years had transformed the quiet, anxious 9-year-old into a confident, thriving middle schooler whose smile now reached his eyes consistently. That's wonderful, I examined the script. Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Playing George Gibbs is a big responsibility. I'm so proud of you. Ms. Anderson said Dad played the same role when he was in 8th grade. Did you know that? My heart warmed at his casual reference to Michael. We'd worked hard to keep his father's memory alive through stories, photos, and the small traditions we maintained. Saturday morning pancakes, summer fishing trips to Michael's favorite lake, the memory garden we tended together. I certainly did. I still have the program somewhere in the attic boxes. Your father was quite the actor in school. I smiled, remembering teenage Michael nervously practicing lines in our living room. He'd be thrilled to see you following in his footsteps. Marcus grinned, then his expression turned more serious. Do you think I should tell Mom about the play? The question didn't surprise me. Victoria had essentially vanished from Marcus's life after moving to the Bahamas. Her promised video calls had dwindled to rare, awkward birthday messages and eventually stopped altogether. Marcus occasionally still sought connection with her. We can send her an email with the dates, I said carefully. It's entirely up to you. He considered this, then shook his head. Maybe not. She didn't answer when I wrote about winning the science fair, and she's probably still traveling with Robert anyway. Through infrequent updates from Daniel, who maintained minimal professional contact with Victoria's attorney regarding support payments, we knew she and Robert had married and were now developing resort properties in Southeast Asia. The support checks arrived regularly, the one commitment she maintained, but contained no personal notes or inquiries about Marcus's well-being. Whatever you decide is fine, I assured him, maintaining the balanced approach our family therapist had recommended. Acknowledging Victoria's existence without creating false expectations of her return or involvement. I think just you and the Chens and Uncle Daniel is enough audience for me, Marcus decided, referring to our neighbors who had become like extended family and to Daniel, who had transitioned from Michael's attorney to a cherished uncle figure in Marcus's life. As Marcus bounded upstairs to start homework, I moved to the kitchen to prepare dinner, pausing to adjust the collection of photos on the refrigerator, Marcus winning his karate tournament, building a science project, laughing with friends at his last birthday party. A visual timeline of healing and growth. The journey hadn't always been smooth. The first year after gaining full custody had brought nightmares, academic struggles, and occasional angry outbursts as Marcus processed the effective loss of both parents. There had been challenging questions I'd struggled to answer. Why doesn't Mom want to talk to me anymore? Did I do something wrong to make her leave? If Dad hadn't died, would Mom have stayed? With the help of an excellent child psychologist, we'd navigated these painful waters together. I'd learned to validate his feelings without vilifying Victoria, to help him understand that her choices reflected her limitations, not his worthiness. Now, 3 years later, Marcus had found his footing. His grades were excellent, his circle of friends solid, his emotional resilience remarkable for a child who had experienced such significant losses. The house that had once been Michael's, then briefly mine, had truly become ours, filled with evidence of our shared life. Marcus's art projects displayed alongside my watercolor attempts, his sports equipment sharing space with my gardening tools, photo albums documenting our camping trips and holiday celebrations. At 70, I had found unexpected vitality in this second round of parenting. The responsibility had given me purpose, while Marcus's energy kept me active and engaged. I'd even started dating recently, a kind widower I'd met through the community theater where Marcus took acting classes. Nothing serious yet, but a pleasant reminder that life continued to offer surprises at every stage. My phone chimed with a text message from Daniel. Court approved the college fund restructuring. All set for Marcus's future education, protected exactly as Michael wanted. Another piece of Michael's careful planning falling into place. Despite Victoria's initial attempts to gain control of Marcus's educational trust, Michael's foresight had created ironclad protections. Now those funds were secured in a structure that would provide for Marcus's college and perhaps even graduate education, regardless of what happened to me in the coming years. As I prepared dinner, I reflected on the strange path that had brought us here. The midnight call that had shattered our world. The gradual revelation of Victoria's true character. The careful strategy that had ultimately protected Marcus from becoming collateral damage in her pursuit of a different life. In my darkest moments during those early days after Michael's death, I couldn't have imagined the life Marcus and I would build from the ashes of that tragedy. The grief remained, would always remain, but it had been integrated into a new reality filled with meaningful connections and moments of genuine joy. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Chen holding a covered dish. I made too much lasagna again, she announced as I opened the door, her standard excuse for the meals she regularly shared with us. And David wants to know if Marcus is still coming to help with the birdhouse project this weekend. He's been talking about nothing else, I confirmed, accepting the dish gratefully. Would you and David like to join us for dinner? Marcus just got some exciting news about the school play. As Mrs. Chen stepped inside, calling up the stairs to congratulate Marcus, who responded with enthusiastic thanks, I felt the quiet satisfaction of community, of the support network we'd built around ourselves that extended beyond biological family. Later that evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, I sat in the peaceful quiet of the living room and opened the memory book we'd created during that first difficult year. Photos of Michael at various ages, Marcus's childish handwriting describing favorite memories of his father, cards from friends and family offering support during our custody journey. On the final page was a quote from Michael's last letter to me: "Tell him stories about me. Not just the good ones, the real ones about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them." I had honored that request, sharing with Marcus the full human truth of his father. A good man who had recognized his marriage was failing, who had seen the potential impact on his son, who had taken concrete steps to protect his child's future even while hoping those protections wouldn't be necessary. When Marcus had asked why his father had changed his will without telling Victoria, I'd explained as gently as possible: "Your dad saw that your mom was making choices that might not prioritize your needs. He wanted to make sure someone would always put you first, no matter what." It was the truth, simplified for a child's understanding, but honest. We had maintained that honesty throughout our journey together, building trust through difficult conversations rather than comfortable evasions. Outside, the garden Michael had loved and Marcus now helped tend caught the last golden light of evening. The roses he'd planted were blooming again, a reminder that life continues its cycles regardless of our personal losses. Inside, his son slept peacefully, surrounded by photos of the father who had loved him enough to ensure his protection even after death. As I closed the memory book and prepared for bed myself, I thought about Michael's extraordinary foresight. He couldn't have known exactly how events would unfold, couldn't have predicted his own untimely death or Victoria's eventual complete departure from Marcus's life. Yet he had recognized the essential character of the woman he'd married, had seen the warning signs of her prioritizing personal desires over family responsibilities, and had taken concrete steps to protect what mattered most to him. In doing so, he'd given both Marcus and me an unexpected gift. Not just financial security or legal protection, but the opportunity to forge a new family bond that might never have developed otherwise. Through our shared grief and subsequent healing, Marcus and I had created something beautiful and enduring, a relationship built on mutual trust, respect, and genuine love that transcended traditional family boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Helping Marcus memorize lines for his play. Attending my own water aerobics class that kept my joints mobile. Coordinating with Daniel about long-term financial planning. Ordinary life continuing in its imperfect, precious way. But tonight, in the quiet of the home we had made together, I felt profound gratitude for my son's final gift, the chance to help raise his child, to see Michael's best qualities emerging in Marcus, to ensure that despite everything, love and wisdom would be his son's true inheritance. Not the legacy any of us would have chosen perhaps, but one we had transformed through courage, persistence, and boundless love into something unexpectedly beautiful.